Imagine growing up believing your life was normal until you find an old poster with your own missing face. In this moving video, you'll follow the true story of a young woman who discovers the shocking truth about her past and the tireless search of a mother who never gave up. Get ready for a roller coaster ride of emotions, suspense, mystery, and redemption. Leave your like to support the channel. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of love. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. I always believed my life was normal. I grew up in a gray brick house with a small yard and a peeling white picket fence, in a town that seemed to forget its own inhabitants as the years passed. My mother, or rather the woman I called my mother, was strict but caring in her own way. My father, a man of few words, spent most of his days immersed in tools in the shed in the backyard. I was an only child, or so I was told. I never questioned it. I never had any reason to, until that day. I was 7 years old when everything changed, but in my childish mind, that event seemed more like a haze, a blurred memory that sometimes visited my dreams, like disconnected flashes, a park, a woman crying, a hand holding mine, dragging me away. These images came and went, without explanation. I grew up thinking they were just dreams. My childhood was marked by a constant sense of disjointedness. I was different, not in the obvious sense. I wasn't taller or smarter or prettier. It was an invisible difference, as if I was out of step with everyone around me. The other kids seemed to have deep roots in this town. I felt floating, like I was always about to be blown away by the wind. These feelings grew stronger as I grew older. I would look in the mirror and not see my own face. The woman I called my mother had dull brown eyes. Mine were a golden green. She had straight dark hair. Mine was wild, with wild waves and an indeterminate color between gold and copper. They said I took after a distant aunt. I believed it. Or I chose to believe it. That's why, that day, as I was rummaging through a rundown antique shop looking for a Halloween costume, my life began to fall apart. Among the piles of yellowed newspapers and broken toys, I found an old box full of papers. Posters. Posters of missing children. Something inside me went cold. My hands shook as I pulled out the papers one by one. Most of them were from decades past. Faces of children who had gone missing in the 70s, 80s, until my eyes stopped on a face. My face. It was like looking at an old photograph of myself, only different. My expression was serious, almost sad. Below the photo, it read, "Missing Sofia Oliveira, 7 years old. Last seen in Parque Central on September 15, 2002. My name was never Sofia, or at least that's what I thought. The world spun for a moment. I had to hold on to a bookshelf to keep from falling. Sofia. Sofia. The name echoed inside my mind like distant thunder. I walked home in a daze, tucking the folded poster deep into my bag. Each step felt like it weighed a ton. I spent the entire dinner staring at my mother, studying every line of her face, every gesture, every word. And for the first time, I realized there was something about her that had always been off, a hidden tension, a fear hidden behind her tired eyes. What had always bothered me, that feeling of not belonging, now had a name, Sofia. But what did that mean? Was I really that missing girl? Was my whole life a lie? For days, I hid the poster, but I couldn't get it out of my head. I began a silent investigation, like someone searching for fragments of a forgotten life. I rummaged through boxes in the attic, looking for old photo albums, documents, any clue that might give me answers. And then, one night, I found a locked box in the back of my parents' closet. The box was made of dark wood, studded with small metal stars. It was locked with a padlock. My fingers glided over the rough surface of the wood. I felt my heart beat so loudly that it seemed to echo in the silent room. I knew that inside that box was the truth about who I was, about who I should have been. But I didn't have the key, and I knew I couldn't ask directly without arousing suspicion. That night, I could barely sleep. I found myself surrounded by dreams, or were they memories, of a woman with light brown hair and golden eyes like mine, calling out to me through the fog. Sophia, Sophia. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I decided I had to find the key. I had to open that box. I had to find out who I was, even if it meant destroying everything I knew. Over the next few days, I began to observe my parents more closely. I looked for opportunities. Then one day, while my mother was distracted on the phone and my father went out to buy tools, I found a small golden key in an old jewelry box in her room. My heart raced. I ran to the closet, shaking from head to toe. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. I held the lid of the box, hesitating. If I opened it, there would be no going back. If I saw what was inside, my life would never be the same. I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. Then, with a quick movement, I lifted the lid. And what I found inside the box were photographs, yellowed papers, and something even stranger, a small rag doll dressed in a faded blue dress. As soon as my fingers touched the doll's rough fabric, a shiver ran down my spine. I knew that doll, or rather part of me recognized it. It was like finding a forgotten piece of myself again. Under the doll, I found a letter. The paper was folded neatly, with my name, Sophia, handwritten on the outside. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter. "My little Sophia," it began, in a soft, soulful handwriting. "If you ever find this, it will be because life has separated us in a way I never wanted. But I have never stopped loving you. I have never stopped looking for you. And I will never give up, as long as my heart beats. You are my daughter, my light, my miracle." The letter was long, filled with words of love and despair. It spoke of sleepless nights, of endless searching, of promises whispered to the starry sky. And then, at the end, a short sentence, like a whisper engraved on paper. "Follow the stars, Sophia. They will lead you to me." I felt the weight of the world crush my chest. I wasn't crazy. It wasn't my imagination. My real mother was alive, and she was waiting for me. The shock left me paralyzed for minutes that seemed like hours. When I was finally able to move, I gathered everything, the doll, the letter, the photos, and hid it in my backpack. I knew that from that moment on, I could no longer blindly trust the people who raised me. That same night, I waited for my adoptive parents to fall asleep. Then, I quietly left the house, taking with me only a flashlight, the missing person poster, the doll, and the letter. I didn't have a clear plan. I just knew that I needed to find that woman, my real mother. I started at the town library, an old building that smelled of old books and dust. I searched through old articles, records of disappearances, anything related to my real name, Sophia Oliveira. Little by little, the pieces began to fall into place. I found old news reports about my disappearance. I saw photographs of the woman who had been looking for me, golden eyes like mine, light brown hair. I read devastating accounts of how she had lost her daughter in a crowded park on a Sunday afternoon, and how she had never been the same since. My heart ached with every word I read. It was as if I could feel her desperation reaching through time and enveloping me. But I also noticed something strange. Official records from the time mentioned flaws in the investigation, clues ignored, suspicions hushed up. It was as if someone didn't want the truth to come out. I returned home with my head throbbing, my heart racing. And then I noticed my foster mother was watching me from the window, her gaze fixed, heavy. She knew I was beginning to find out. That night, she entered my room without knocking. He sat on the edge of the bed and was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. "You found it, didn't you?" she said finally, her voice hoarse. I didn't answer. "It was for your own good," she continued, tears forming in her eyes. "You were a lost girl, abandoned. We gave you a better life." "I wasn't abandoned," I whispered. "I was stolen." The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to justify herself, just cried. Part of me wanted to hug her, to thank her for her years of care. But another part, the part that remembered the woman's golden eyes in the letter, couldn't forgive. I needed to keep going. In the following days, I began to act more cautiously. I knew they might try to stop me. I kept investigating. I looked for missing children's associations, lawyers, any means of finding my biological mother. And then one day, I found a clue. A recent article from a few months ago told of a woman who had been searching for her lost daughter for 20 years. She now worked in a small bookstore in a town about 200 miles away. My heart raced. It was her. Without thinking twice, I planned everything. I packed a backpack with some clothes, documents, and the rag doll. I hid enough money for a trip. The next night, I waited until my adoptive parents were asleep again. I climbed out of my bedroom window, as I had so often dreamed of escaping as a child. Only this time, I had a destination. I walked through the deserted city to the bus station. With every step, I felt guilt, fear, and hope intertwining within me. I bought a one-way ticket. I sat in the window seat, and as the bus pulled away, leaving behind the gray city I had called home for so long, I clutched the rag doll to my chest. I looked at the sky through the window. The stars shone, twinkling like ancient promises. "Follow the stars, Sophia. They will lead you to me." The words from the letter echoed in my mind. I didn't know what awaited me in that bookstore. I didn't know if she would still recognize me, if she would still accept me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. I closed my eyes, letting sleep take me, lulled by the gentle rocking of the bus and the silent hope of finally finding my origins again. When I woke up, hours later, the bus was pulling into town. The driver announced the last stop. I grabbed my backpack, walked down the steps, and stepped onto the cold sidewalk of the new city. The air smelled of rain and old books. I followed the instructions I had written down. I walked through narrow streets lined with old buildings. Each step seemed heavier than the last. And then, finally, I saw it. The little bookstore. The lights were on. And behind the fogged-up display window, a woman was leafing through a book, her face partially hidden by the shadow. My heart almost stopped. It was her. It was my mother. For a moment, I stood frozen in front of the window. The world around me seemed to disappear. The sound of cars, the murmur of people passing by, even the cold morning wind. Everything was gone. There was only her, the woman behind the glass, the woman that my heart, even without clear memories, recognized as home. My hands were sweating. My throat was dry as sand. I took a hesitant step toward the bookstore door. The bell above the door tinkled softly as I pushed it open. The smell of old paper, polished wood, and freshly brewed coffee immediately enveloped me, welcoming me like a silent hug. She looked up from her book. For a second, our eyes met. And at that moment, something changed in his face. It was as if an echo had passed through time. His eyes widened. His lips parted, as if he were about to call out a name his heart had never forgotten. But she didn't say anything. Neither did I. I stood there, unable to move. She placed the book on the counter with shaking hands and turned, walking toward me. Her every step seemed to echo inside my chest. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low, carrying more than just politeness. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. My hands instinctively went to my backpack. I pulled out the rag doll, holding it like a fragile shield between us. She looked at the doll, and then, her eyes filled with tears. "Sophia?" she whispered, as if afraid that the very sound would break the spell of that moment. My heart shattered. I felt the world spin again, like it had in that antique store. But this time differently, like a lost part of me was finally falling into place. "Yes," I replied, my voice broken, barely audible. She staggered a little, her hand going to her mouth, stifling a sob. And then, without warning, he pulled me into a tight, desperate hug. I felt her warmth, the familiar scent that my memory had buried so deeply. I closed my eyes and allowed myself for a moment to just be that 7-year-old child who had never stopped waiting for this moment. My girl," she repeated through tears. We cried there, together, in the middle of the silent bookstore, like two broken souls that had finally found each other. Time seemed to have stopped, but soon reality began to seep through the cracks of that perfect moment. There were questions. There were hurts. There was a whole life stolen that couldn't simply be ignored. We sat on one of the worn couches in the corner of the bookstore. She poured me a cup of hot tea, her hands still shaking. "I've been looking for you all these years," she said, her voice breaking. "I've put up posters, I've hired detectives. I've even moved to different places, following false leads." She told me about the day I disappeared, how she lost sight of me for just a few minutes in the park, how she searched frantically, how she called the police, how she suffered accusations, looks of pity, judgments. They said you'd probably been taken, but no one saw anything, no real clues. "I never stopped believing you were alive," she whispered, holding my hand so tightly she seemed afraid I'd disappear again. Her every word was like a knife piercing my soul. Part of me wanted to sink into that embrace, never letting go. Another part was filled with questions that burned in my throat. "Why did they do this to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated, looking down. "I don't know," she said, the pain evident in her eyes. "But I'll find out. We'll find out together." I spent the afternoon with her, telling her fragments of my life. She listened to every word, as if she were collecting precious pieces of a lost treasure. But deep down, something was bothering me, something that didn't want to be ignored. When it finally got dark and she closed the bookstore, she offered me a makeshift room in the back to stay in. I accepted, still unable to pull myself away from her. While she prepared a simple dinner, hot soup and bread, I discreetly browsed the shelves of the bookstore. It was then that I found an old book, hidden behind a row of novels. It was no ordinary book. It was a diary. The cover was worn leather, with no title. Curious, I opened it. The first few pages were filled with old notes, times, names, addresses. But as I leafed through it, I noticed something disturbing. Among the notes, I saw newspaper clippings about missing children. Not just me, many children, from different cities, from different years. The heart raced. What was that diary doing there? Why did my mother hide him? I felt a chill run down my spine. I heard footsteps approaching. I quickly closed the diary and put it back, trying to act natural. My mother walked into the room with 2 bowls of soup in her hands, smiling. But now, there was a shadow in his smile that I hadn't noticed before. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And I was beginning to realize that perhaps the story of my disappearance was much darker than I could ever have imagined. The soup was warm and comforting, but with each spoonful I found it harder to swallow. Her words were still gentle, her questions were caring, but something was wrong. Something inside me screamed for me to be alert. After dinner, we settled on the couch, and she started showing me photo albums. Pictures from when I was a baby, birthdays I couldn't remember, family parties that seemed like they were from another lifetime. But there was something strange about the albums, too. The photos seemed incomplete, like pieces had been ripped out. People cut out of the images, empty spaces that seemed to beg for someone to be erased. My mind was working a mile a minute, trying to put the pieces together, and the hidden diary wouldn't leave my head. That night, lying on a makeshift mattress in the back room of the bookstore, I stared at the cracked ceiling, unable to sleep. What did those newspaper clippings of other missing children mean? Why did she keep that? I wanted to trust her. Part of me begged to trust her. But there was another part, more instinctive, more primitive, that knew something wasn't right. The sound of rain began to beat against the windows, creating an irregular rhythm that only increased my anxiety. It was then that I heard it. Steps. Someone walking through the bookstore in the middle of the night. The sound was soft but insistent, like bare feet sliding across the wooden floor. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. The handle on my bedroom door turned slowly. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. The door opened with a barely perceptible creak. I felt a presence standing in the doorway. I could hear her breathing, heavy, uneven. Minutes passed, Then the door closed again, and the silence returned. I waited another hour until I was sure she had returned to her room. Then, without making a sound, I stood up. I knew I needed to find out the truth. I needed to see that diary again. I walked barefoot to the back section of the bookstore. Streetlight streamed in through the windows, creating ghostly patterns on the wooden floor. My fingers found the hidden book. This time, I leafed through it more carefully. Among the clippings of missing children, I found handwritten notes, names, addresses, dates. And on many pages, little symbols are drawn: stars, moons, eyes. A feeling of absolute dread washed over me. It wasn't just the record of a desperate mother. It felt like something different, almost ritualistic. At the end of the diary, there was a list. And there, at the top, my name, Sofia Oliveira. Below my name, dates, the date of my disappearance, and another date, marked with a question mark. My hands were shaking so much I could barely flip through the rest. In the end, I found a sealed envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter, different from the first. When the cycle is complete, she will return to where she belongs. The search will end, and the bond will be sealed. Blood must meet blood for the past to be made right. The words made no sense, but the terror I felt was real, tangible, unbearable. I quickly closed the diary and went back to my room, trying to act natural. I wrapped myself in the blanket, my body shaking. My mind was running in circles, trying to understand. My real mother had been searching for me for years. But could it be possible that deep down she was involved in something much bigger and darker than just missing a lost daughter? The next morning, the atmosphere between us seemed normal. She made pancakes, talked about plans for us to spend the day together, as if nothing had happened. But my eyes saw everything differently now. I noticed details that had previously escaped me. The books with covers in strange languages, the symbols engraved on small decorative objects, her fleeting gaze when I asked her about the past. I needed answers, real answers. I hid my discomfort and accepted her invitation to help her organize the bookstore's storage room, an old, damp basement full of boxes and old furniture. We went down together. The air smelled of mold and rotting wood. She turned on a dim lamp hanging from the ceiling. While she rummaged through some boxes, I took the opportunity to discreetly explore the space. It was then that I saw a door, half hidden behind a fallen bookshelf. A dark wooden door, reinforced with iron bars. And, engraved in the wood, the same symbol I saw repeated in the diary. A star surrounded by eyes. My stomach turned. "What's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She froze. "Nothing important," he replied quickly, looking away. But it was important. Very important. And I knew that behind that door was the key to the whole mystery of my life. Now I needed to figure out how to get there, before it was too late. I pretended to accept her answer. I pretended not to see the sudden tension in her body. But inside, every fiber of my being screamed to run, to escape, to find out the truth before it was too late. We spent the rest of the morning rearranging musty boxes, pretending to be normal. But the hidden door called to me, like an incessant whisper in the back of my mind. When we finally made it back up to the bookstore, our clothes covered in dust and our hair sticking to our foreheads from the basement humidity, she suggested I rest a bit, maybe take a nap. I thanked him, trying to hide my anxiety. As she walked away to attend to a customer, I waited for the perfect opportunity. I went down to the basement again, silently. The dim light bulb still swayed from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I walked to the hidden door. It was locked with a thick lock. I ran my fingers over the symbol carved into the wood, the star surrounded by eyes. The cold sensation burned my skin. I thought about the golden key I had found months ago in the house where I grew up. I thought about the symbols, the newspaper clippings, the mysterious letter. I knew that door held the answers. I looked around, searching for something I could use to pick the lock. On a nearby shelf, I found a rusty iron bar. I swallowed hard. I was about to try to force the lock when I heard footsteps again. This time, there were determined steps. She was walking down the stairs. There was no way to escape without being seen. In a panic, I hid behind a pile of boxes. The light from the flashlight she carried swept across the basement, flickering in the shadows. She stopped in front of the door. For a moment, I thought it was going to open. But instead, he whispered something I could barely understand. Words in a strange language that sounded like an ancient prayer, or a spell. I felt the air grow heavier, as if the atmosphere itself resisted those words. Then she turned and walked back upstairs, closing the basement door behind her. I waited several minutes before moving. My legs were shaking. I needed to get out of there. I needed help. But who to turn to? Was my adoptive mother an accomplice? Would the police believe me, a lost teenager, with no official documents, no real evidence? I cautiously walked up to the bookstore, which was now empty. She was nowhere to be found. I took the chance. I grabbed my backpack, still hidden behind the counter, and ran out into the street. The light rain had returned, leaving the asphalt shiny under the light of the street lamps. I ran without looking back, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. I only stopped when I reached a 24-hour coffee shop. I walked in, panting, and ordered a hot chocolate, just to have an excuse to stay there. I sat in the far corner, trying to organize my thoughts. I picked up the old poster of my disappearance. I picked up the rag doll. I grabbed the diary I had hidden as a precaution, quickly stuffing it into my backpack before leaving the bookstore. I opened it again. I reviewed the notes. It was then that I noticed. In the margins of some pages, there were geographic coordinates written in small letters. Coordinates. What did that mean? Did they lead somewhere? Somewhere that could explain everything? I took my cell phone out of my pocket, an old device that I only used for emergencies, and typed the coordinates into a map app. The point that appeared on the map was on the outskirts of the city, in an isolated rural area, surrounded by forests, a place called simply Star Haven. The same symbol of the star and the eyes came to mind. Everything was starting to fall into place. My real mother, or the woman she claimed to be, was part of something much bigger, something ancient, something dark. But I needed to know the truth, even if it cost me everything. I quickly paid for the drink and left the coffee shop. I got a taxi, using the little money I had left. I gave the improvised address, knowing that I was going into a stranger. During the journey, the tall trees and dark fields seemed to swallow me up, further and further away from the city, closer and closer to darkness. Finally, the taxi stopped at the entrance to a narrow trail lined with gnarled pine trees. "This is it," the driver said nervously. "I'm not going any further." I paid, got out of the car, and watched as it disappeared over the horizon. Now, I was alone to face whatever was waiting for me. With my backpack on my back and my flashlight in hand, I started walking along the trail. The wind howled through the trees, like voices whispering my name. Sophia, Sophia. With each step, the symbol of the star and eyes seemed to shine brighter in my mind, and deep in the darkness ahead, I began to see lights, faint, pulsating, like small distant suns. The star refuge was there, waiting for me, and with it, the truth that could change everything forever. The trail seemed to close in around me the further I went. Dry branches brushed my face, twisting roots tried to grab my feet. The air grew colder, thicker. Each step seemed to drag fear itself closer to me. The lights I saw in the distance began to take shape. They were torches. Torches lined up, as if they were marking an invisible path to something I couldn't yet see. Every few feet, I saw the same symbol carved into the trees, the star surrounded by eyes, as if the trunks themselves were watching me, judging my every move. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my hesitant footsteps on the damp earth. Finally, the trail opened up into a circular clearing. In the center, an ancient stone building, low, covered in moss, with inscriptions carved all over it. It looked like an abandoned chapel, but without any sign of known religion. It was there, the refuge of the stars. I felt my heart tighten in my chest. The urge to run was almost unbearable. But something, an invisible thread, perhaps the promise made in that old letter, pulled me forward. The door to the building was ajar. Faint light escaped through the cracks. I swallowed my fear and moved forward. The wood creaked beneath my fingers as I pushed the door open. Inside, the scene I encountered was etched in my mind forever. The hall was circular, with walls covered in ancient symbols. In the center was a sort of stone altar, and around him, several hooded figures, motionless as statues. They seemed to be waiting for me. The only sound was the crackling of candles scattered in iron holders. Then one of the figures moved. He removed the hood, and it was her, the woman I called Mother, my mom. His golden eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "Welcome, Sophia," she said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "You're back where you belong." I took a step back, panicked. "What is this? Who are you?" My voice came out weak, choked with terror. She smiled, a sad, almost loving smile. "You are special, Sophia. You always have been, since the day you were born." "Special?" I repeated, not understanding. "We are guardians of an ancient lineage, a lineage of blood and stars. You were taken away, but the bond was never broken. Now that you have returned, the cycle can be complete." "What cycle?" I shouted, stepping back further. She took a few steps towards me, extending her hand. "Don't be afraid. It's your destiny. You were born for it." "No!" I screamed. Suddenly, the other figures began to move, forming a tight circle around me. My eyes desperately searched for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. It was then that I saw it. On the stone altar, there was something covered in a black cloth, something that pulsed, as if it were alive. And when my mother pulled back the cloth, revealing what was underneath, my scream was lost in the night. Beneath the black cloth, in the center of the altar, there was a kind of mirror, but it was no ordinary mirror. Its surface did not reflect the surroundings. It reflected only the night sky, filled with stars that moved slowly, as if they were alive. It was like looking at the universe itself encapsulated in a stone frame. And in the center of that mirror was something even more terrifying, an outline of a child. A fragile silhouette, arms outstretched, made of pure, pulsating light. My eyes widened. I recognized that shape. Instinctively, I knew it was me, or a part of me. "This is your essence," my mother said, stepping closer. "Stolen from you the day you were taken. Now it's time to bring it back together." The figures around me began to murmur, chanting ancient words in a language that made my blood run cold. The air became dense, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. "I don't understand!" I screamed, backing away until my back was against the cold stone wall. "What do you want from me?" My mother knelt before the altar, her hands raised. "Sophia, you are the key. Your essence is unique, the link that can restore our lost bloodline. When your essence is reintegrated, when blood meets blood, Starhaven will shine again, and our people will be restored." "But what about me?" I asked, my voice breaking, struggling to hold back tears. "What's wrong with me?" She hesitated, the first and only real hesitation I saw in her. "You will become part of the whole," he said, bowing his head. "Your individuality will be sacrificed for something greater, for eternity." The ground seemed to open up beneath my feet. They didn't just want to find me again. They wanted to use me, consume me. My heart raced. I tried to think fast. I looked for a loophole, a way to escape, but the circle of figures closed more and more. My mother stood up, walking towards me with pleading hands. "You don't need to be afraid," she murmured. "You were always destined for this, since before you were born." "No!" I screamed, pushing her back with all my strength. She staggered, shocked. The current of murmurs increased in intensity. The candles flickered violently. The mirror on the altar shone brighter, as if it had sensed my resistance. And then, as if driven by a primitive instinct, I ran. I ran towards the building's door. I ran as if my life depended on it, because it did. The hooded figures tried to stop me, but I managed to dodge, stumbling down the stone steps. The cold bit into my skin as I ran down the trail, never looking back. I could hear their screams, calls, orders to capture me. The world seemed to collapse around me. The forest twisted, the trees closed in, the wind roared like a living creature. And in the back of my mind, her voice still echoed, "Sophia, don't run away. You belong to us." I ran until my legs couldn't take it anymore. Until panting, I fell to my knees in the cold mud. I looked up, and for the first time, I saw the night sky as it was reflected in the altar. The stars were moving. They drew shapes. They drew a map. I understood in a flash of intuition. The stars were trying to show me the way, the true path, not to be consumed, but to be saved. With my last bit of strength, I got up and followed the pattern in the sky. The forest seemed to want to swallow me, but I defied it at every step. Minutes that felt like hours later, I arrived at a different clearing. In the center was an old stone hut, covered in vines. A faint light escaped from a broken window. I approached, trembling, and knocked on the door. For a moment, there was no response. Then a hoarse, tired voice answered from the other side. "Who's there?" "My name is Sophia," I screamed desperately. "I need help. They're coming for me." The door creaked open, and there, before me, stood an old man, with eyes as golden as mine. He stared at me for a moment, and then he murmured, "You finally arrived, but not long ago. They've already started the hunt." The old man opened the door just enough for me to enter, then hurriedly closed it, securing 3 heavy bolts. Inside the hut, the smell of burning wood and ancient herbs filled the air. He lit a lamp and led me to a worn armchair, where I collapsed, exhausted. "They've already started," he muttered, pacing back and forth. "I warned you. I warned you that if they brought you back early, the seal would break." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He crouched down in front of me, his golden eyes fixed on mine. "They were our protectors," he said. "They guarded the knowledge. They protected what was left of Starhaven. But over time, the pain of loss, the longing, the obsession, my mother," I interrupted. He shook his head regretfully. "She was the strongest of us all, the most devoted. But her pain changed her. She crossed the line, made old pacts, forgot that true love doesn't require sacrifice." "So, she doesn't love me?" I asked, a lump in my throat. "She loves," he replied sadly, "but she loves in the wrong way. She wants to imprison you to save herself. She doesn't realize that she is destroying what she was meant to protect." Silent tears streamed down my face. "What do I do?" I asked, desperate. He struggled to his feet and picked up an object covered in cloth from the corner of the room. When he removed the cloth, he revealed a mirror, identical to the one on the altar, but cracked in the middle. "This is the true bond," he said. "The broken mirror. Your essence is already here, Sophia. They want to complete a false ritual, but the truth is within you. You need nothing more than who you already are." "But they'll find me," I whispered. "They won't stop. Then you must choose," he said gravely. "Face them, or run away forever." "And you? Will you help me?" He smiled bitterly. "My time has long ended. Now, it is you who carries the flame." A distant sound cut through the air. The snap of branches. The sound of quick footsteps in the forest. They were coming. "Quick," he said, placing the broken mirror in my hands. "Look inside." With trembling hands, I held up the mirror. My reflected image was distorted by the crack, but something inside me, a light, began to grow. I remembered the good times, the small joys stolen by pain. I remembered the affection of the woman who raised me, the empty looks that I never understood. I remembered the incessant search for my true mother, distorted by obsession. And then I understood. My value was not in belonging to anyone. My value was in existing, in being free. I closed my eyes and pressed the mirror to my chest. I felt the energy rise within me, warm, pulsing. alive. The knocking on the door started. They were outside, calling my name. "Sophia! Open up! You're ours!" The old man stood behind me, silent. "Trust yourself," he whispered. With a scream that mixed fear, pain, and courage, I lifted the mirror and smashed it against the floor. The shrapnel exploded into light. A wave of energy passed through the cabin, sweeping everything away. The door was ripped from its hinges. The hooded figures were thrown back like leaves in the wind. My mother, the woman who once loved me and then tried to possess me, fell to her knees on the trail, her eyes filling with tears. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice breaking. I looked at her one last time, and for the first time I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel guilty. I felt only compassion. She was a prisoner of her own pain, but I wouldn't be. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of history finally lift from my shoulders. The forest opened up before me, as if giving me passage, and when I looked up at the sky, I saw the stars shining brighter than ever, free, just like me. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment saying, "Love never fails." Your support is what inspires us to tell more stories like this. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this video with someone special, because sometimes a story can change a life.